everybody, and welcome to the Quick and Carry Kitchen. I'm Kristen Madreen, and I want to welcome you to a super special show. I'm sitting here with our butcher, Sean Torres from Max Bowers here in Traverse City, where we all live. And Sean is here today to help me with beef roast, and we're going to talk about meat, specifically beef meat in the Instant Pot, and how it works and why it works and how to make a really good roast. So welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here with me today.
Thank you, Kristen.
So I decided when we decided to do this show that I would really look at all of the different recipes, and I'm going to shout out to Jeffrey from Pressure Luck because this is his recipe. I've only modified it by taking out the mushrooms because I don't eat mushrooms, so I didn't want to put those in this today. And I'm going to show you the finished product first, and then we're going to move into this roast that's ready to go in the pot here. So, first of all, I want to show you this roast. I made this earlier today. Oh, I'm going to make a mess. I hope you can see this well enough. This is beautifully done. You can see that it was seared on all of the sides, so it's very nice and brown everywhere. And in the first Instant Pot here, we have a gravy that looks just absolutely delicious. And just before we went live, I put in a slurry of cornstarch and water, and it thickened up this wonderful gravy that's in here. And the gravy has onions, wine, some really good red wine. I got a Pinot Noir, and some beef broth. And I'm going to put this chuck roast back in there with all of the gravy. And then one of the other interesting things about Jeffrey's way of cooking this, let's see, there we go. I don't want to splash this.
There you go.
There, okay, there we go. Jeffrey says to put your potatoes and carrots in little foil packs like this. And again, they are perfectly done. And it is amazing to me that it works because they were in there for an hour. And that seems amazing to me that they're perfect. And I'm going to dump these in here too. There's that. And now this. Now the little potatoes. And there we have our lunch is ready, guys. So when we're done today, we're all going to sit and eat this, and I'm sure it's going to be absolutely delicious. So now I'm going to, I've got my foodie on high, and where's my, there it is, my little fork. And I'm just going to put this in here. And it can be doing this while we sit and talk. I have put rosemary, thyme, salt, pepper, some parsley, some onion powder, and garlic powder together, and put it all over the roast, every side of it. So it's got that rub soaked into it a little bit, and now we're going to saute it. So, tell me about this roast, sir,
Okay.
and why the specific cut, and let's start there.
Let's start there. Okay, traditional pot roasts are generally your pieces of beef that the animal uses more, so they, in the initial, they start out a little bit tougher, which is one reason for the cooking method. Okay, now what we're achieving here, with all the natural sugars in your rub, the proteins in the muscle, this is called the Maillard effect. Okay, and that's where you get the sear and the brown for that good char flavor. It's going to lock in some of the moisture. It's going to make the muscle a little denser on the outside. Now, this is the exact roast that I eat, and the reason for this is because I recommend a top blade chuck roast. Okay, now we got this at Max Bowers, and the reason I get this roast in particular is because number one, it's top choice. It's the top 1/3 of choice in the country, and it does make a difference of the grade of beef that you start with for the desired end result, especially if you're in a company. Okay, now the top blade chuck roast has a bigger diameter. Okay, now with the science behind the Quick and Carry pressure cooker, you're dealing with moisture and you're dealing with pressure. So what you want is more surface area, okay? Whereas if you start with, some of you may be familiar with a similar cut from the chuck, which is an English roast. Now, English roast has a smaller diameter and is generally a little thicker. So what that is, even though the roast may be equivalent in weight, the surface area isn't there, okay? Now, the science behind the pressure cooker is, most of these are the valves on these are designed to put about 15 pounds of pressure. It'll hold 15 pounds. Now, everybody knows, well, most folks know, that water boils at 212 degrees, okay? Now, once you add 15 pounds of pressure, that brings the boiling point of water actually up because of the atmospheric pressure to 250 degrees, which is how you get a faster cook. Now, with that pressure and that steam that's happening inside the Instapot, or the pressure cooker, is that it gives more surface area for that steam and pressure to work on, which is why you get a shorter cook time and a more tender piece of beef. Now, what you're doing is you're allowing the pressure of the pressure cooker and the higher temperature is actually breaking down collagen and myosin, which are the two factors in a muscle, which is water-based, that hold the fibers of the muscle together, which is another reason we go to a chuck roast, because it carries more intermuscular fat. And what happens is fat, being an oil base, bonding the water-based fibers of the muscle, what happens is it breaks down that fat that holds the fibers of the muscle together, and that's how you get a tender roast.
That is amazing. That was super scientific even. I had no idea that's really why this works the way
When you lock that lid down, that's what's happening.
That's what's happening. Awesome. Thank you, Sean, for explaining that to us. So when I said to you yesterday, okay, I need a good roast, you told me that we talked about the rump and the butt is actually part of the shoulder, not the butt of the cow.
And that is correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That is, and that comes down to cooking method also. Rump being from the hind, chuck designating the front shoulder, okay? Now, the rump being the biggest, leanest muscles on the animal carry the least amount of intermuscular fat because they're used all the time. Okay, now that is why you'll see a big solid piece of meat. Traditional roast beef, dry roasted in the oven, meant to slice thin and serve. If that's the presentation you're looking for and the meal you're going to prepare, then absolutely you want to go with something from the hind of the animal, of the steer. Don't eat cows, we milk cows, you only eat steers. And that's why we go up to the front shoulder, where the ribeye starts to carry up into the shoulder. They break it off right at the third rib, and then you have a bunch of different muscles like you'll notice on that roast. It's not one solid piece, which also gives the Instapot a lot more surface area to work on and really get in there and give you a desired roast. So I would say the key to doing a roast in the Instapot, if some of you are having problems, is to go with maybe a little thinner roast, but a bigger diameter, which is what's going to give that pocket. Woo! Look at that.
There we go. All right.
But I think the result is going to be much better going with a bigger diameter, maybe just a little bit thinner overall. But what you'll get is better penetration from the steam and the pressure, and it'll really drive those spices in there, and you'll end up with just a better meal.
Awesome. That is great to know. Now, why are some cuts better in the pressure cooker than others? Why doesn't it work on every cut the same way?
Mm-hmm.
Is it because of the surface area, or is it because of where the meat comes from in the body of the steer?
I'm going to say it's actually both.
Okay.
Because if you do, you don't want to cook a rump roast like we described, a dry roast that you cook uncovered, and then you're going to have to slice it to serve, because that piece just does not carry the intermuscular fat. The collagen and the myosin are real tightly bound. You know, they're into that muscle because that muscle gets used so much by the animal. I do know that most people prefer poultry comes out excellent in the Instapot, either bone-in or boneless. The only thing you have to worry about is that you're not going to overdo it so your chicken doesn't just turn into mush. Same thing with ribs. Because of the added fat and the bone actually helps cook it all the way through a little faster. But it is due to the characteristic of the muscle, the way the muscle is used by the animal. The grade is going to be another part. You know, we don't sell anything less than top choice Top Choice and Prime are both key. You have to start with something good to end up with something good. And even at those grades of beef, the price on these are still economical. You can still get a good meal if you don't mind a little bit of fat, but you got to remember that fat is where your flavor and your tenderness come from.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to check on our roast here. I've done one side, and
It already smells
it
delicious.
does smell delicious. And I've seared the second side, and because this is so thick, I'm actually going to sear the sides too, so that they've gotten what he just talked about, the Maillard effect on all of it will make it much more flavorful when it's done cooking, and that's obviously what we want. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the next part of the recipe. Just because of time constraints, we're not going to be able to do it all in front of you. So once this is done cooking here on all of its sides, I'm going to actually take out this roast, and I'm going to, oh, there we go, come on. This side doesn't want to stay up, so I'm going to hold it up with my with my awesome Quick and Carry tongs, which you all know how I feel about our tongs. They are so good. And when I was making this at home this morning, I was so grateful to have my Quick and Carry tongs, because these roasts are big and they're thick, and I just really, I'm so glad that we have such great tongs. So once this is done, searing on all of the sides, all right, I'm going to bring that out, and you can see that this roast has really taken on some nice color on all sides. And now what I'm going to do is I've taken a very large onion, and I'm just going to let that saute for a few minutes. And at this point, you can make sure that you are deglazing the bottom of the pan. And in an Instant Pot, that's really important. In the Foodie, it's not quite as much because it's a non-stick, but in the Instant Pot, you really, really, really have to deglaze in this particular recipe. So you can use some butter, you can use the onions themselves, give out some water, but make sure that you scrape off all of the stuff at the bottom. And if you need to, add a little bit of the broth. Here we have this is some beef broth. It's 2 cups of beef broth and 1 cup of the red wine. And I'm going to use that to deglaze the pot in just a second. And then we're going to put all of the other stuff into the pot and seal it up and cook it for 60 minutes, which I was surprised that 60 did it for this big of a roast.
It really did, and that's what I do. It was funny that when you got it out and we started talking, that I do mine the exact same way. Now most folks, I have the smaller version of this, and when I put it on a pot roast setting, it goes for 45 minutes, which generally for a roast this size isn't long enough. So I really have to go a cycle and a half. And that may be another problem that you folks are having, is that you're going tried and true by the directions. And another thing that I learned is I put my meat on the bottom, okay? And that, like Christine talked about, because of the way the heating element on the Instant Pot is on the very bottom. So I find if I put starches or sugars on the bottom, it will gunk right back up, and that will inhibit the heat penetration, which may be another reason. That's why deglazing is so important, both for flavor and just for efficiency of your unit.
Yes, absolutely. And if you don't deglaze the pan and there's burnt stuff on the bottom, your pressure cooker will not come to pressure. So it's also really important for the next phase. So it's deglaze is partly for the flavor, so that you get up all of the brown bits on the bottom from searing the meat, but you also really want to have it clean on the bottom so that the pot can come up to pressure. All right, let's see who's here. Hi, Amy. How are you? Amy Main is with us today. Shelley Robinson, hi from Iowa. Susan Albers. Hey, Sue Johns from Windsor, the UK. Sue, I just had told Sean that we have a fan of the show that watches almost every week from the UK. So Sue, thanks
Sue.
for being there. Joyce Wiles, Marilyn Goucher, how are you? Robin and Kathy, dear friends. My dear friend Alexandra is watching this morning too, and my sister is pointing out about how I don't eat mushrooms, and she
Yeah.
thinks that's really silly.
It's my loss too.
All right, so if you have any questions for Sean, please ask them, because we want to make sure that we're covering the stuff that you're interested in. All right, so I'm gonna. Yep. All right, this is all done here. Perfect. All right, so now we're gonna put this guy back in on top of the onions, and I'm gonna stop the saute, turn it off. There we go. And I'm going to put all of this over it. And there we go. Oh, that is going to be so delicious. And I said to Sean before this started, look at the mess. We've got all sorts of stuff on this table already this morning.
That's just like my kitchen when I do that.
Yeah. Judy Burr, Jennifer Kershoff, hello, all of you, and Talani Sumner, hi from Western North Carolina, hello. Tina Jackal is here from Oregon. Hi, everyone. We're so glad that you're here. If you have a question for Sean, be sure to ask it now. And all right, so now I'm going to get the correct lid. This is the Foodie lid. It's just like the pressure cooker lid. And I want to make sure that it's set to sealing before I turn it on. And it is set to sealing. And I'm going to put it for pressure and high. And I'm going to put it for 60 minutes, 1 hour, and start. Now, you've probably figured out when you cook with your pressure cooker that you have to give everything a little rest at
Yes.
the end. So let's talk about how with a steak on the grill, it's best to let it rest. And with even something like this with all the liquid in it, you still want the meat to rest. Why is that, Sean?
That is the natural depressurizer, and what that does is as the heat dissipates, so does the pressure, because all of the molecules in the water and everything stop dancing around so much and creating the water to boil. Most of that is so you just get penetration rather than an overcooked piece of meat. If you could just hold it in there, and I think on one of these of this size, it takes about 20-25 minutes for it to pressure down, and you actually help stop the cook process, but you still have that pressure, which is still working to break down the collagen, the myosin, all the things that hold that muscle together. But that is a key important fact. What it does is it'll stop some of the juices from flowing, especially with a steak, like when you take a steak off the grill or you're doing your prime rib or whatever. It lets all of those things kind of solidify back up so that your sear holds it all in. It's not trying to purge anymore because you're equalizing the pressure on the outside and the inside. You're not working with a negative or a positive atmosphere. That is probably the most exact answer. But as you notice, even with a big roast or just with an 1.25 inch steak, it's the same principle. Anytime you have a core that's going to be a different cook temperature than your outside of meat that you've already seared and already prepared, that's going to let everything just settle, keep all the juices in until you go to slice in your presentation and go to serve. Then all that juice will come out.
That is really, really awesome. You know, I know that most recipes with meat in them call for a natural pressure release, and but 2 weeks ago for my show we had some chicken in a soup, and we did a quick pressure release. And then last week with carnitas we also did a quick pressure release, and I was curious as to how that was going to make the meat. With the carnitas it was perfect, and they were perfectly done even with not letting them have the natural pressure release. And so most of the time the recipes that you're going to find for an Instant Pot or a pressure cooker like the Foodie are going to have, if it's a meat, and especially a beef, it's going to have the natural pressure release. And if you can do that, that is definitely the best thing for the meat, right?
I do, absolutely, with meat. Vegetables, not so much. Chicken, because of the smaller diameter and usually the leanness of the muscle, not so much. But anytime you're dealing with hogs or steers, you know, a nice pork roast, a nice beef roast, absolutely a benefit, without a doubt. Give yourself that little bit of extra time. Don't worry about what's going on in here because it's all good. And you're going to have a great meal at the end, more than if you did a quick release.
Absolutely. You know what? We were so busy talking, I forgot to put our little packets of the vegetables in. So
I was worried about the one that's already done over here.
Yeah. So I'm going to stick these in the pot.
That's another good tip with your veggies in the tin foil so they don't overdo.
Yes, and I do think that that is really super important. Let me get it back on 1 hour here. There we go. Start. I really appreciate that Jeffrey tried it this way and that it worked so well, because now I'll do that even with other things that I cook. You can do it with chicken. You could do it with really anything that you're trying to prepare. Put them in the foil packet, and they're in here for an hour, and yet they were perfectly done. I mean, they were not too mushy at all, and so I think this is a delicious. It's going to be a good lunch, don't you think?
That was a tip I did not know either, so I'm stealing that one too, Jeffrey. So you know.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for being so great at what you do, and this is a wonderful recipe. All right, hey Kathy Genevieve, how are you today? Cheryl from Northern California, Lori Stribling. Good morning, Lori. I know it's, what is it, about 9, little after 9 there. Glad that you've joined us today. Kathy Genevieve, we're always glad to see you. She was one of our first watchers. She's been with the show all the way from the beginning, and so I feel like I know some of these people because they have been with us for so long. Right. So that's very cool. Okay, let's just review the recipe. You have a chuck roast. Well, not really a chuck roast. I can't really call it.
Not just any chuck roast. Yes, top blade chuck roast is preferable versus the English roast. English roast is a leaner version of the chuck roast. All the same things will happen, but because the intermuscular fat is a lot less than the top blade chuck roast, then you're just going to want to give it a little additional time.
Excellent. So you prepare the chuck roast with the rub, and when we ask you if you'd like the recipe, just say yes. And we'll send you this recipe today, and you'll see that there's a lot of herbs and spices, oregano, garlic salt, onion powder, salt and pepper, rosemary, thyme, and parsley, and you rub that onto the entirety of your roast, both sides and along the outside sides of the roast. And then I put it in, and it was really just a couple minutes each side. It didn't take very long to get a really nice Maillard effect.
That's right. That's key. Absolutely.
It is key.
For the time it takes, the payoff is well worth it.
Absolutely. So don't skip that step. I took the roast out, and I put in an onion, sauteed the onion. You can add garlic at that point if you want. And then put the roast back in on top of the onions, and then the wine and the broth. Put your potatoes and your carrots in little foil packets on top of it, seal it all up, and you want it to cook for an hour. And then if a roast isn't done with an Instant Pot, one of the nicest things is you can take it out, look at it, check it, and if it's not done, you can give it 10 more minutes.
I do quite often.
Do you?
And that is, yes, that is one of the benefits. I am new to the Instant Pot, so I am still learning. I'm trying to traditionally train my cooking methods that most folks are used to doing pot roast, just simply in a crock pot. You give it all day, and you can put a shoe in a crock pot and it'd come out good. But having it that efficient to where I can get off work and still have pot roast, that's excellent. Even if it does take me an extra 15 minutes, which I will start the cycle back over, crank the lid down, and let it finish off.
A couple of our watchers today have asked, How big are these roasts? Do you know when you?
That top blade chuck roast is about 2.5 inches thick, and it's about 4.5 to 5 pounds.
Okay, it's about 4.5 pounds. That's what I thought it
Yeah.
was. When I cooked it this morning, I was prepared for it to take a little longer because it's so big. So that's a great one. And can I add the mushrooms and onion before adding the meat back in? Yes, absolutely. That is another great question. What I would do with the mushrooms though, and if you look at the way Jeffrey does it, he puts the onion on the bottom and then the roast and then the mushrooms not covered with foil, just he puts the mushrooms over the roast and then the foil on top of them. So if you want to put mushrooms in, which I'm sure everybody but me would have done today, just put them on top of the roast and they'll stay under the foil packets when you've put those in. So that's a great question. Both Alexandra and Lori had asked about how big the roast is, and then Lori asked about adding the mushrooms and onion before adding the meat back in. So, okay, let's see if there's anything else that we need to do besides get ready to eat this delicious food. What is the, oh, I can't think of the word I want. This is a problem. Well, it's escaped me now, and we are almost out of time anyway. How would you adjust the time for a smaller roast? Alex, that's a great question. I would still do it for an hour, and because in the 6 quart, which I know that Alexandra has a 6 quart in her house, so you would want to keep it at about an hour, and probably with the 3-pound roast, that would be good. You wouldn't need any longer than that. I had first put this on for 65 minutes, but I checked it at 60 minutes and it was perfectly done. And it looks great. It looks like it's going to be perfect today. So
the only advantage that I would add is if you have a roast that big and you are worried about being done on time, you might want to quarter it or half it to give yourself nice big chunks, still pot roast size, but it just, like I explained before, just giving more surface area for the heat and the pressure to work on might get you there in just one cycle also.
Awesome. That's great advice. So thanks for watching today, and thanks to you, Sean,
You're
for
welcome.
coming in.
Thank
I'm
you,
so glad
everybody.
that you were here to help me make my roast, and I can't wait to taste this one. It's smelling so delicious in the kitchen that you cannot believe how yummy this smells. And if you want the recipe, just say yes when we ask it. We love your questions and your comments down below. So tell me what which recipe you like the best for roast. If you have other questions about cooking a roast in the Instant Pot, let us know. But we really love that some of you have been here for the live, and we know lots of you will be joining us later. And so welcome to all of you who do that. And as Julia Child used to say, bon appetit!